You're listening to the new media. You're listening to Mitchell Talks. Learn more at MitchellTalks.com and follow me, Scott Mitchell, on Twitter at MitchellTalks.
In this Mitchell Talks episode, State Auditor and Inspector Gary Jones responds to the criticism he's received over the recent audit of the State Veterans Affairs System. Much of the heat that he's received is over the findings. The VA director called it a political hit job, and the Daily Oklahoman slammed the report as essentially rumor mongering with no substance. My criticism, however, comes with the timing of the report, coming less than a month before the auditor's deputy, Cyndi Bird, faces a runoff with Charles Prater in the GOP primary to see who will succeed the term-limited auditor. I agreed to let Mr. Jones respond, and I agreed with him to press my point. The entire interview is presented here for you. None of our conversation is edited or altered, with the exception of including the segment of last week's Your Vote Counts, to which Mr. Jones took exception. Good morning, Mr. Auditor. How are you?
Yes, I'm good. Just had breakfast, the Bradley breakfast, and other than running out of coffee, I'm doing good.
Tell me, now we're talking this morning about Your Vote Counts from Sunday.
Right.
You had some problems, what we said, specifically the leader and myself.
Sure.
For those folks who didn't hear that soundbite, this is it. All right, this last one, Grant Herms did the story this week. The media's been talking about an audit by the State Auditor Inspector of Oklahoma Department of Veterans Affairs, and it's not a good audit. But there's three things that bother me. Number one is it's an audit that took 4 or 5 years. It's an audit that comes out 3 weeks before the auditor's hand-picked choice is in a runoff for the GOP nomination. Both of those are troubling, but the worst part of it is we're still talking about the Department of Veterans Affairs still being bad and mistreating veterans. This is a story that's got multiple layers. Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, the very worst part about this story is our veterans deserve better. That's the worst part about this story. This had just abuse after abuse after abuse in our facilities that exist to take care of those that took care of us, and it's disgusting, and it needs to stop. It talks about veterans not being able to be seen by physicians, staffing levels being too low, not having proper meal plans. It really is terrible. But the two other problems to look at when you're talking about continuing to fund things like education, audits like this don't help, showing misspending in government. We need to root that out. But it also, on the audit side, there was a lot of talk about how the House passed an independent audit panel, and then that was passed by the Senate, which has started some of these audits. 3 years to complete an audit of the Department of Veteran Affairs is way too long. That can't happen. That's too long.
Lots and lots of questions.
Lots of veterans were hurt during that time period.
And this is a firm grasp of the office. Let me remind viewers, this is not a new issue. We have Alex Cameron here, Scott Carter, Bob Sands. They did the story on Veterans Affairs in 2012. I mean, this has been going on for a long time. So an audit coming out 3 weeks before an election raises questions, but also, as he just said, this raises questions about what are we doing on veterans?
Yeah, this issue is really about two main things. And those two things are how do we treat veterans in the state of Oklahoma and trust in your government. And quite frankly, we haven't done our job in treating our veterans, those who deserve the best treatment in our state, with respect that they deserve. And that needs to change. And second of all, when it comes to issues of trust, this audit once again shows that the government that has been elected, that has been in power for the last decade, has time and time again shown that trust is an issue. And we're about to go into another election cycle. There are big issues at hand: education, what we're going to do with marijuana. Trust has got to be rebuilt with the public and their legislatures. And if they can't have it, then they need to send new people.
All right, so there's what we said. Your response?
Well, I think that, first of all, the audit didn't take 5 years or 3 years. This is actually the third audit that's been done on this agency in 5 years.
By your office?
By our office. We were asked by the Attorney General to look into some matters at the Veterans Affairs. The request came in June of 2017. Our auditor's been working on this. We had some scope limitations based on the fact that management was monitoring our activities. They would contact people and say, we know the auditors are there, what did they ask? They were sending out memos saying, here's questions you can ask, otherwise we don't want you to answer these other questions. And, that's...
Why would you have limitations like that?
I beg your pardon?
Why would you have limitations like that?
Well, because the limitations were it's the limitations that management put on us. Management, what they should do and what's proper is to say, you answer the questions. They're here to, and any questions they ask that you answer. And it's that way you get the input from multiple sources, not just from the central office. So because of that, we chose to have to use procedures to gather information independently. We did surveys, which is one method that we do. We received over 200 and something surveys back. Very alarming information. And then what we do is we follow up those surveys and do individual interviews with individuals and do our test work that way. And so our people did that because of those additional procedures that require the audit to take longer than it would have. And because it's a request from the Attorney General, which is called an 18F request, which that's the statute, that we are required to give the report to the Attorney General. So we finished our field work, took it through quality control, gave it to the Attorney General on the 22nd of June. If we wanted to make it political, like what the implication was, that I guess we could have sped it up and said, let's get it out quick, let's try to get it out before the June 27th primary, and we've never done that. We tell our people, said, you don't speed them up, you don't slow them down, you don't put anything in an audit because of politics, and you don't withhold anything because of politics. That's been our procedure policy since the day I got in office. And so what we did is we gave the report to the Attorney General on June 22nd. Actually, while they were reviewing the report, a letter came from the Executive Director of Veterans Affairs and said they would like the audit to be released. The Attorney General sent us a letter saying that they did not object to us releasing the audit. We received that letter on July 31st. The audit was released the very next day, August 1st. And so that's our procedure. There's nothing political about it. Our auditors, I don't know the political affiliation of 110 employees. I couldn't tell you the political affiliation of 5, and I don't care. They do good work. And so that being said, that there was a misperception, and even the minority leader said, yeah, it shouldn't have taken 3.5 years. It didn't take 3.5 years. It took less than a year, and it took longer than expected because of the agency not being cooperative.
This was the third audit, you say. I don't want to get it to the points that you've made. There were 3 audits by your department over the last how many years of the veterans?
Over the last 5 years. Actually, the last 5 years, but it covers clear back to when I think 2010.
What has happened to all those audits? When you've turned them over, who have you turned them over to?
Well, number one, we give a copy to the governor. The first 2 audits were requested by the governor. We give a copy to the governor. We give a copy to the speaker, the pro tem. We post them online. Every audit that we do is posted online and available for the public. It's available for any representative, any public citizen, or any citizen that wants to read those. And so we made them public. And there were findings in those audits and issues that were being addressed. And in this particular audit, there were things that were being done that we didn't disagree with, but the real concern was what's called a tone at the top issue, which was very similar to some of the issues we had at the health department, is that the way decisions were being made, the way they were being implemented, and we felt that it had an impact, could have an impact on the care of the veterans, which is ultimately what we should be looking at.
Were the other 2 the same scope that you did? Because I understand your point about there were 3 audits done. So what are the differences in the 3? You've explained the first 2 were given to the governor. I don't know what happened with that, but is this audit different than the first couple?
This audit is different than the first couple because what we were really looking at is the management issues, the things that were happening, the decisions that were being made and how they were being made. Some of the things we found, for instance, the commission is the one that actually is supposed to govern this board, or this body, or this agency. And they've gone from meeting once a month with the commissioners to meeting once every 3 months. Used to, when the commission met, the people that run the centers, the director of the individual 7 centers, would come to the meetings so they could share information with the commissioners. The commissioners could ask them questions, and they would also hold their meetings at different centers. So that way, the different commissioners would be able to visit, see what's going on, and have a more of a hands-on type approach to this. All those things have stopped. They now have meet once a month. They tell the directors of the centers that you do not show up to the commission meetings, you don't communicate with the commissioners, and so it's a real issue, and that's one of the things we brought out. Now, I will tell you this, that the commission is the one that has ultimate responsibility. The commission hasn't met. Some of the commissioners would like to meet, discuss these items, but they're not going to meet until their next. I say there's not a meeting scheduled to their next regular scheduled meeting, which is in September. I believe that the commission should meet. They should address these issues and address the concerns in the audit instead of starting attacking the messenger.
Okay, so this was an investigative audit as opposed to a financial audit. This is a
special audit, and a special audit to look at these items that have been brought to our attention. And we looked at the items that were requested by the Attorney General.
And let me get to the point about attacking the messenger and get to that in just a moment. But let's talk about this. This was an 18F.
Right.
Which is the sort of, you do that for the Attorney General's office. Is
right.
That correct?
The Attorney General has the ability to initiate a investigative audit through the 18F statute.
Was that something that would be done, say, at Tourism or Department of Health when you were back over there doing those issues? Are those same sort of audits?
Okay, the initial request for the Department of Health was a special request made by Commissioner Klein. And so Commissioner Klein requested we look at these items. And then after they had a change of management, Preston Dorflinger went to the Attorney General and asked that be turned into an 18F.
Do you know when that was?
I know that Commissioner Klein requested the initial audit in September, and then the governor asked for their resignations in October. Preston came in at that time. I'm say approximately November.
So the reaction to this, I saw where that some of the minority leadership in the House has taken and said, yeah, we need to. They've asked for some firings, people being removed, I think, to the governor. I saw that yesterday. But besides our program, the Oklahoman did a pretty ugly editorial about this.
Sure they did.
Talked about it more rumor mongering than finance. Your response to what the Oklahoman's editorial said?
Well, I wish they would actually look into the meat of the audit and the concerns that we have. The problem I had, and I did call them and talk to the managing editor, is that what happens when you have this initial response out there, you diminish the work that's done, and you don't look at the real issues and concerns that are out there. What they need to do is look at the audit, read the audit, and address the concerns, as opposed to just this backlash. And I will tell you that when reading that, it's funny because they attacked us on the wording, the saying that this is not an audit according to audit standards. Well, that's boilerplate language when you do these type of audits. You're not issuing an opinion like you do in a financial statement audit. So you make that clear that we're not. And not every audit is looking at all the financial aspects. We also look at internal controls and how things are being run. And that was the impetus on what we addressed in the Department of Health audit. It was an internal control audit. It was a tone at the top. It's how upper management is managing things and how things are happening because of that particular problem that we have in that agency.
So the audit comes out, and I think the thing that you implied that we talked about, the implication was that folks like me had made it into a political thing. There was political motives. Were there any political motives on your part at all? Because, as has been stated, your right-hand person is in a runoff in 3 weeks from yesterday, a month from when the audit came out. And in all fairness, I say to you, with any political considerations about letting out an audit that really is the sort of audit that is going to be well received by the public, because people know there's problems at the Department of Veterans Affairs. we're a month away, and you come out looking like you're really helping veterans. That's what the stories say. Your response to there was about anything that had to do with political implications because of this audit.
Absolutely nothing political. I've had audits. We had an audit on the sheriff department that was ready to come out. I was contacted. It was before an election. If you remember the Oklahoma County Sheriff's, the audit was ready to go before the election. I was contacted and said, would you please hold off releasing this audit? And I said, no, when it's ready, it's ready. Our policy has always been when it's ready, it goes. If there was anything political, I was running for governor on the June 27th ballot. If it was political, I would have sped the process up, tried to hurry to get that out before. The draft copy was ready on the 22nd of June. I knew that it would not come out before that time. We said, whenever it's ready, it goes. And you're always going to have these allegations that, what if we waited till after the election and we put it out? We said, okay, we held it because of the election, and it came out in case of the sheriff department. And then it came out that all these problems were happening at the sheriff department, and the sheriff got reelected. Someone says, hold it, you withheld this audit so this guy could get reelected. What happened in that particular case is we released the audit. The sheriff won re-election anyway, and then afterwards, when they got into the meat of the audit, they realized there were some major concerns here, and ultimately the sheriff resigned. So we could have played games with that. We never do. From day one, I've told my people, we don't play these games. And so, number one, the audit went out the first day that it was available to go out after the Attorney General allowed us to release it. It was released on August 1st. There's not a primary till the 28th of August. There's plenty of time to discuss and look at the contents of this audit. So just the implication that I guess when you get into political season, everybody's looking for some reason for things to be political. This particular audit, Cyndi Bird is the one that is running for my position. She is in charge of local government audits. Of the 400-something audits we do a year, she's responsible for 300 of those. This is not one of those. And so, but it's the we never give any consideration as to whether or not this is political. It's going to be politically helpful or politically harmful. What we do is we do our job as auditors. We present the facts as we see them with no political bias, and we do them in a manner of when they're ready, they go. And so it took longer than we would liked because of the lack of cooperation from management at ODVA. Also, there was a delay because it was an 18F, that if it wasn't an 18F, the audit report probably would have come out about right after the June primary. And the reason I say that is we had the draft ready on the 22nd. When the draft's ready, it usually takes you a few days to get everything ready. So we would have not sped it up and tried to rush the process in order to get it out before the primary. It would have come out shortly after that. And the delay was because the Attorney General's office was reviewing it, looking at it, and trying to make the determination when the report would be released. The request came from ODVA to ask that it be released. And so shortly after that request came, the Attorney General sent us a letter and said, we're going to allow you to release it. And the very next day we released it.
But he didn't direct you to release it.
Well, we have never withheld. Our policy has always been that these audits are public policy, and that whenever they're ready, they're released. There was no reason to hold it at that point in time. If we had held it, that would have been political. And so we said, here, the audit is ready to go. I mean, we knew that the Department of Veterans Affairs a day or two earlier had asked it be released, and it was our opinion that we were probably going to receive a request, and the very next day after we received the request, we released it.
To the point of the politics of this, and I remind you, back in 2006, a GOP nominee by the name of Gary Jones was running against an incumbent state auditor and inspector a guy by the name of Jeff McMahon, who has a prison number.
Right.
And in 2006, Gary Jones, as I recall this pretty well, you had a lot of incriminating evidence against that state auditor and inspector, and the media ignored it. Is that fair to say that moving into that year that there was a lot of information that they didn't take that down ballot thing seriously?
That's fair to say, and the same information that was provided to them resulted in something like 8 indictments and 7 convictions, including the auditor and his wife.
So if the media had taken you more serious that year, it's likely that the voters would have saved themselves a special election and all of the stuff that
well,
goes
it was an appointment. There was an appointment in that particular case. It wasn't a special election, but yeah, I mean, it's obvious. I mean, I think that that information, if it was presented, would have easily swung a 1.5%. And so, yeah, you're right. And so, but that being said, we have always, I mean, we've had cases to where it probably could have helped me politically if I had withheld information from an audit. It would have helped me. I say that, of course, we would never consider putting anything that wasn't proper in an audit, but withholding it or delaying it or speeding it up, there's things there that probably could have helped, but never in any case have I ever been accused of releasing one or holding one for my political gain or political gain from anybody I supported.
Until now, that people have implied.
Well,
something.
And the implication there is, please tell me when it should be released. Okay, you put yourself in that scenario. You have a report you've been working on for a year. You've given the draft report, which says it's virtually ready with until you do the final details on it. June 22nd, you get a notice that someone has asked it be released. You're in thinking that it's probably going to be receive a letter sometime. We receive a letter a day or two later after that request came from ODVA to the Attorney General's office, and the very next day we released it. Any other decision to release an audit other than when it's ready, that's when you would have political implications. I mean, we didn't determine that the Attorney General was going to give us that letter July 31st. I mean, I haven't heard anybody say the Attorney General is looking at this being political because they allowed it to be released. I haven't heard, and I'm not implying that as well. They did go through a process to review it, to look at it, and to make some determinations, and ultimately, while they were trying to figure out whether or not, or when they wanted to have it released, the request came, they sent us a letter, and we followed through with that. It's so my question to anybody that questions our timing of the release, if the first time that you actually have an opportunity to release it is the day after you receive the request, any decision that you would make other than to release it at the soonest possible time would be considered political. I mean, if you want to do it politically, let's hold off and let's release it 5 days before the election. But the implication, because it was released 27 days before the election, on the very first day that could possibly be released, I think it's a long stretch to say that by any stretch of the imagination that the timing was political.
The reason I brought up and I'm going to address your question directly, is about 2006, is the press didn't do their job in 2006. They didn't do a good job. And fast forward, and you ask, when do you release this? I understand your policy, appreciate your policy. But never before has there been an audit that would have bring such high approval rankings so close to an election involving someone who you have publicly endorsed. In fact, when I don't
understand how. Basically,
well, let me finish.
Basically, what that says, any employee in my office would, but.
Let me finish mine,
sure.
If you'd be so kind. This is a person that's, I don't know, handpicked is the right term, but you certainly endorse. This would be a continuation of the Jones legacy. And let me remind you of not so recent history. A guy by the name of James Comey started talking about cases 4 months in 2016 before an election, and again in October. He was roundly criticized by both sides for that. And it's easy to say, and why the implication, I'm not making the implication, I'm saying, answer to your question, when was the time to release it? After the election. because any high-profile positive press helps your candidate, the person who would be succeeding.
Did you read yesterday's editorial, and did you read today's article? And I would tell you the reason I say that is that there are people that would say that this is not positive press, is that they're trying to pick it apart, and they're trying to do that. We understand that. That's the nature of the business. We understand that.
Well, it was not designed to be negative. You didn't put it out thinking you were going to get a backlash, did you?
We actually did. We thought we sat there and we realized that you got to understand that you're talking about some people that probably are pretty politically connected, and there's going to be a backlash, and they're going to and so what we said was, folks, as long as we tell the facts, tell the truth the best we see it, and present it in a professional manner, that's all we can do. And so we've had these backlashes based on audits. I mean, I can remember we put out the audit on the Indian Cultural Center. There are several people that came back and said, here, how dare you? This is something we need to get done, and we wish you hadn't have done that, but we don't, like you said, we don't do that when we look into we present the facts as they are in the best possible time frame that we can.
That's still not the same thing.
It's
still not the same thing.
And to say, okay, please tell me what the blackout period is. What is the blackout period? Where is there a period of time that says that? Now, granted, we were getting pressure from people wanting the audit to be released earlier, and we were getting pressure from the people that didn't want the audit released. And what we said was, we don't bow to either of those pressures. When it's ready to go, it goes.
And I appreciate that policy. I'm just saying that this is a point where, as a manager, you have to take the politics into account. You released an audit into a toxic wave of campaign season, and had you released it after the runoff, there would have been no allegations of politics.
Well, and I disagree with that. And the same thing with it. What if we had, because we received a tremendous amount of pressure when we released the audit on the Sheriff's Department of Oklahoma County. They said this is a hatchet job. You're trying to support one candidate over the other. That this should have waited till after the election. And what we said was, when the audit's ready to go, it goes. And so, and that particular case, the individual that the audit reflected on negatively still won. And so, think of the implications if we had held that audit, which a lot of people thought we should have. If we had held that audit till after the election, and then it came out, and then they're going to go, well, why in the world did you hold this?
I agree with what you did. Yeah. The problem is that the audit that you just did was helped. Well, you said she wasn't involved in it, but it was in your office, somebody in your office, in the campaign. The sheriff's race, there wasn't anybody in your office in the sheriff's race.
Well, and here's the case there, is the fact that never gave one particular thought over the process of whether or not this is going to help Cyndi Bird. And I would tell you that, number one, is Cyndi is her own person, and that I truly believe that Cyndi will make changes, and she'll do what she thinks is the best interest. It's amazing to me. We put the right people in the right places, and when I came into office, we had a 5 and 6 year backlog, and so what we did is I challenged the employees to come up with a plan. Tell me how we're going to do this, and we had different audit managers, and the one that came up with the plan that really shined was Cyndi. And so she said, this is what I think we should do. This is how I think we could do it. This is what I need to get it done. I said, okay. And so we made her the state director of county audits, and she got it done. She's the one that came back and cleared up a multi-year backlog and did it by saving the taxpayers money and getting the job done. So, and she's still focusing on, she didn't come in and review this audit. She didn't come back and had no process in this audit at all, because she's focused on doing her job that she does every day for the citizens of Oklahoma. And everything that I do positively may have some positive impact on people that work within the office, but if there's anything that I do is perceived as negative, it has a negative impact. And so whilst there may be some people that say, yes, we think the auditor's office is doing a good job, this person is an integral part of the auditor's office, they deserve to be the next state auditor, there are other people that said, we don't like this, we hold this against them, and they're going to hold that against her, which is not right. They should base their decision based her qualifications, her experience, and how she will serve as a state auditor. And so the idea it's going to be a third Gary Jones term is ludicrous, because this individual stands on their own 2 feet. This will. She's running on her own merit. She's not running. I mean,
are you supporting Cyndi Bird?
I'm supporting Cyndi Bird because I as a loyal employer to somebody that has done a great job, that I truly believe is the best qualified, that can do the best job for the citizens of Oklahoma. Yes, I support her. And I know her opponent. I've heard what he has to say, and I will tell you that there's a big difference between being an auditor and an accountant. I mean, Cyndi is she's a certified forensic auditor. She fits all the qualifications of if their resume said, okay, we're gonna do an interview and we're gonna base it based on the resumes, based on the experience, and based on the knowledge, this race is over. Now, granted, I will tell you that I understand that you have to win this race because of politics. I lost to a guy 2 times that I knew was not as qualified for the job as I was, and ultimately it proved that. But it's to imply that we're playing politics through the audit process is ludicrous.
Well, I don't think it's ludicrous, and I think my 2006 analogy is they didn't do their job in 2006. I see
you're talking about the press. You're talking about the press didn't do their job. The other thing, too, is the Ethics Commission had that information. The same information that convicted the gentleman was given to the Ethics Commission, I think 6 months after he was convicted to federal prison. They issued a verbal reprimand. And so, yeah, there are flaws within the system, but this has nothing to do with this. We didn't.
Well, it actually does. The press is involving themselves in. This time they're taking a look at down ballot races.
Sure.
And especially the timing. I think we'll never agree on this. All right.
Well, no.
But the fact is, this is something that happened a month out. Your office, and there was somebody in the office that's running to succeed.
Does that mean that somebody who works for the office that's qualified and has 21 years experience should be disqualified because they work in the office?
No, it means their boss. No, it means their boss shouldn't have put the audit out a month before she was up for election in a runoff. That's why.
And the idea that any audit that comes out should have a blackout period.
And by the way, I didn't imply she was disqualified. I don't know where that came from. That had nothing to do with our conversation.
What I'm saying too, though, is the implication is that we have a blackout period.
I didn't imply a blackout period. I said you shouldn't have done it inside of a month. You should have waited until afterwards. You know what? We wouldn't have this conversation.
That would make a 1 month blackout period.
Well, if you haven't, you've noticed what happened with when James Comey interjected himself into a campaign. You have noticed that, right?
James Comey was a little different situation, and I agree. I understand.
And that was 4 months out, and he's catching hell from everybody.
And the implication there is, does he not do anything? Does he wait till after the election? Do they sit on that information? Which is part of the...
Yes. Answer is yes. When you look at what's happening in Washington, he violated everything he could possibly violate. I'm saying this, but forget about the legal part of it. I'm just talking about the press reaction to this and people's perceptions. If you are 4 months out and you catch hell, it just seems to me like I understand and accept that you wanted to get this thing out right away.
Well, okay, and let me tell you what.
But you didn't have to, my point.
We're going to disagree on the timing. Because my policy has always been, the office policy since I've been in the office is that we don't hold them, we don't speed them up, we don't add things, we don't remove things, we release them when they're ready. This decision was made based on the timing of when the audit became ready. It could have gone out as early as the latter part of June. That's the earliest it could have gone out if we had gotten the authority from the Attorney General to release it. So the timing of that report, as far as when it's going to go out, is going to be determined on when the Attorney General tells us we could release it. If you also remember, we had an audit on Tar Creek. We asked that audit be released, and the Attorney General at that point in time made the decision not to allow it to be released. It was almost 4 years later till that audit got released. If I had had my way, as soon as the report was ready, and as soon as the Attorney General reviewed it for any action they might take, then at that point in time, the audit should have been authorized to be released.
Don't disagree with that.
Yeah. So,
what I'm disagreeing with is this is the one case in all these 8 years where you have a person in your office that it's just before an election you release an audit that you didn't have to release.
Well, I did
and
not.
Before the election.
Okay, I did not have to release it. The implication was it was released when it was released because of politics. My position is it was released because it was ready, because we had the authority to release it, the very first possible time to release it, and that if we had held it, then that would have been political.
So and we'll move on to a couple more topics, just for the record. You asked when it was, and then you're talking to somebody who was very loud defending you in 2006, that the press did not do a good job.
Sure.
Had you released, and you had taken some heat from somebody for releasing this after the runoff, I would have defended you on that one.
I understand. We have a difference of opinion. That's why I'm saying is that we sat down and using our professional skepticism as far as when we think the proper time to release this audit is, and the determination was when it was ready, because keep in mind, there were people that wanted us to release this audit before they got out of session because of the scope limitation, because of the problems of gathering information within the agency. It took it longer to get done. And so what we said is that when it's ready, it's ready. We did not tell them we're going to release a partially completed report. We were only going to release it once we got the information and we were able to gather it and finish the audit. And so, like I said, June 22nd was the first time that we gave the draft. July 31st was the date the Attorney General said we're going to allow you to release it, and that's the very next day is when we released it. There were nothing political that went into that decision. That's always been our policy. We've continued to follow that policy on every single audit since I've been there.
Let's talk about a couple other options, other questions. You just said you pursued the job twice. The second time that you pursued it, probably had there been more diligence by the media, and I think in our podcast here that Grant Herm is saying the media sometimes has dropped the ball about down ballot races. Then you won 2 terms. You've not always been in lockstep with the GOP, the leadership in the House, the Senate, sometimes the governor. The question is, what would you recommend moving forward? There's this audit commission coming along. As you, we want to talk about the future, but looking at this, and this is the twilight of your 2 terms.
Sure.
The election's coming up in November, and you'll be doing something else. What are your recommendations for leadership for the public about auditing? Last night, as you know, Mr. Stitt has made auditing agencies a big deal. So has the governor.
He did a poll, and in fact, it's funny. The last question on the poll was, Gary Richardson wants to audit everything. Does that make you more or less likely to vote for him? The very 3 days later, there's an ad out that says, let's audit everything. It's a buzzword. We have, the first thing I say is, please tell me what has not been audited. I heard during one forum that the health department hadn't been audited in 14 years. The health department gets 2 audits every year. They're part of the big comprehensive annual financial report. What needs to happen is we need to empower the auditor's office more. We need to give them the resources. Keep in mind the appropriations has been cut from $5 million to $3 million since I've been there. The question right now, the commission that's set up now, the misconception is that the legislators have more power now over the audit process. Keep in mind, the legislature could always ask for an audit. The Speaker and the Pro Tem together could ask for an audit. And since I've been in office, in fact, since the statute was changed from Speaker or Pro Tem back in 2004, whenever Democrats realized Republicans were taking over the House, they changed it to Speaker and Pro Tem. Since that law's been passed, there's never been a request coming from the legislature. The legislature could ask for audits. The governor can ask for audits. And now they've got a commission made up of non-elected people appointed by the Speaker, the Pro Tem, and the governor to ask to have these agencies audited. They've always had the authority to do that. Now, I will tell you that after our initiative, in 2011, we tried to get permission to do performance audits and the resources to do those, and one senator blocked our efforts. Then we came back and started looking at that, thinking, okay, how can we work more closely with the legislature and this process? Because we literally have dozens and dozens of legislators coming to us asking us to audit things. We said, well, here's the procedure. You have to go to the Speaker, and the Pro Tem have to come together and request. There's never been a request from that process. So what we did is we looked at, and this was something that was proposed years ago, to create a joint committee on accountability. Joint Committee on Accountability was made up of members of the House and the Senate, And in that particular case, they would set up their own audit office, and they would have their own auditors. Well, that got vetoed by Governor Henry because he said it's a duplication of efforts. So we came back and said, hey, why don't we do this? Why don't we do a joint committee on accountability that's made up of people appointed by the Speaker and the Pro Tem, Republicans and Democrats. Now, the minority leader and the minority in the House and Senate would have a member on it. And then the auditor's office would appoint people to this committee. And then they would meet, be required to meet at least once every 90 days. They would determine which audits to do in what order. Any member of the House or Senate that wanted to make a request could come to that committee, make their pitch, and they would vote, and they would have a mechanism by which that they could initiate an audit. And that bill passed the House overwhelmingly, but got held up in the Senate by the same senator that killed our other bill, and never would let it be heard. Finally, it came up a year later, and it passed the House overwhelmingly, and the senator finally told the author of the bill in the Senate that he was going to let it be heard. He said, oh, by the way, I've talked to Denise Northup in the governor's office, and if it passes, she's going to veto it. It passed the Senate unanimously. That senator actually voted for the bill, but he had already arranged for that bill to be vetoed. And the governor said, well, it's a duplication of efforts. And the reason it was a duplication of efforts, not because of a duplication of anything that we do, but because they had set up these performance teams in the Office of Management and Enterprise Services for them to do these performance reviews. And they actually put more money into that than what we were asking to do performance audits. And we don't know of any review that's ever been released. They finally disbanded those this year. And then this last year, they had 3 bills coming up that had to do with performance audits. Representative Mark LePac reintroduced the bill for Joint Committee on Accountability. Then there was 2 other bills, one of them which is the commission. The Joint Committee on Accountability received overwhelming votes from the Democrats and the Republicans. It received far more votes in the House than any other bill. And it never got a hearing in the Senate. The one that got pushed was this commission, which was pushed. Now, what's interesting is there are 9 members, 3 appointed by the Speaker of the Pro Tem in the Senate, and the 10th member is the head of OMES. OMES provides most of the financial decisions made in the state of Oklahoma. They shouldn't be grading their own test. So now we have this commission. It's been delayed. They violated the Open Meetings Act. They're just now letting contracts. What needs to happen is that they need to come back. They need to authorize the Joint Committee on Accountability. It's bipartisan, bicameral, gives the legislator subpoena power, and gives them a tremendous amount of power to provide this oversight, allows every member of the House and Senate to have impact. I'm told, and now the author of the bill was Senator Greg Treat. Senator Greg Treat is going to be the Senate President Pro Tem of the Senate. I understand that he plans on bringing that bill back. I think that's by far a better mechanism to provide accountability and transparency. I will tell you, and what it does, it says that the House and the Senate will work with the agency that is the elected representative of the citizens to provide audits. And it's amazing to me, these people that are not in favor of us doing these performance audits will say, well, we trust the auditor Gary Jones, but we don't know that we've had previous auditors that weren't so trustworthy, so we're not going to give them the authority to do this. Well, that's double talk. And what needs to happen is they need to empower the legislature through this committee, empower the auditor's office, and form that teamwork of them working together to provide that oversight. It's bicameral. It's House and Senate, it's bipartisan, it's Democrat, Republicans, and you have the people that would actually be involved in the audits. And people say, well, sometimes you don't have the expertise to do audits. I said, you know what, you're right. And on those occasions when we don't, we go out for RFPs and we let bids out, and we do that on an ongoing basis to hire people. For instance, when they're looking at the pension, the actuarial formulas of the pension to determine whether or not those things are figured correctly, we put out an RFP and we hire a firm that specializes in that to look at those things. The same thing with any other aspect of state government. We have the knowledge and the ability to understand how to go through those RFP processes, select those people, and do the work that we can do, but also recognize the fact that we can't do everything. So that's the better mechanism. I hope that happens. I've been pushing that for a long time. There's been many things that I have pushed that are just now getting done. For instance, the assessors in many counties not properly assessing properties. I identified that in the first week I was in office, started the process of fixing that, and we're finally making some major steps on getting that resolved in my last few months of office. And I'm proud to say that I stuck with it and got it done. And so there's a lot of things that need to be done, and that's why you need people that understand the processes, understand how it works. The last thing you want in the auditor's office is somebody that has to come in and have on-the-job training to understand how government auditing works. I mean, a lot of the audits we do determine whether or not we get federal monies. And Cyndi has headed up, her team has uncovered corruption and waste. There's been many people that have left office, been removed from office, been indicted on her work. And so, like I said, she stands on her own. I'm the guy that happens to provide the tools necessary for those professionals to do their job, and she's one of those professionals.
One of the issues that's still plaguing Oklahoma right now, and we talked years ago, of course, is the Oklahoma State Department of Health, which with Dr. Klein was one of the worst departments in the world. There was somebody in the media screaming about it years ago. I can't think of who it was. And then in the fall, all the dominoes fall. It seems as if the media's really kind of walked away from that story because they've been so focused on the State Department of Health having to regulate medicinal marijuana. Take us back, because this may become a campaign issue in the fall with Democrats and Republicans. What happened? What did you know about the State Department of Health? What happened in the interim? It was controversial. There was some disagreements between you and OMS and the interim over there at the State Department of Health. Help us understand the past so that people look at this and go, what can we do to talk about moving forward the future? They have not been cooperative. The State Department of Health, has not been cooperative on this council that was put together by the governor with Tulsa and Oklahoma County. They're not providing financial information. A lot of bad culture is still there. Help us out at 10,000 feet about what happened at the State Department of Health and how it can be stopped in the future.
Well, basically what you had some individuals at the Department of Health that were making decisions unbeknownst to the board. I think unbeknownst to the director. I think that what happened was you had an individual who was looking at a certain aspect of it. He was leaving the financial management of the agency to somebody else. They were making decisions. They went years without a chief financial officer. A problem that was recognized years ago was that they actually were operating two different accounting systems. They had an internal accounting system where they kept track of internal activities, and they had a external accounting system that was the official state records.
When did you find out about the two sets of books?
We found out about that while we were doing looking at the health department as part of our comprehensive annual financial report. What happened is they brought in a new chief financial officer, CPA, and he brought information to us that says that we have problems here, and we think that because of these problems that we're using money that's restricted that we shouldn't be using. We have all these monies here that we borrowed from one account that we owe to another that have to be paid back. And so subsequently we've got major financial problems. Well, we're not the accountants. We can't make management decisions. So what we did is we said, hey, listen, we're going to report this to the people that are in charge of finances for the state.
When was that?
That was initially we first heard something about 1st of August. What we did is once we heard that, we had to go back in and say, okay, let's run some tests to determine whether or not the information we're being given has merit. There was some merit to what he was saying. There was funds that were shuffled around that should not have been shuffled around, money that had been given to an agency that should not have been given to it. And so it was given to TSET. Given to TSET. Okay. So what we said was we reported that to OMES, which is in charge of finances. The director of OMES is also was the Secretary of State Finance, and we went on about our audit. And in the last part of October, what happened was I get called into a meeting at the governor's office, and it's in the meeting, it's obvious that somebody from OMES had been there at the health department looking at things, which they should have been. And I was informed, along with others at that time, that there was going to be a change in management, that the secretary and his two top lieutenants were being removed, and other people were going to, and that they were going to put Preston Dorflinger in there to be the interim manager. Actually, the Attorney General said, well, you can't make that decision. That's the board decision that had to be made. They called a special meeting of the board. The board, in turn, accepted the resignation of the secretary and the others, and put the Secretary of Finance, State Finance, in there. Shortly, now keep in mind, in September, I think September 28th, we received a letter from the Secretary of Health. Anyway, we received some Secretary of Health that asked us to come in and do an audit. The reason being, there was questions. They could not figure out exactly where they were financially. One person's telling them one thing, these other people are telling something. He said, come in and sort it out for us. We started through that process, and then all of a sudden this blew up. Then they turned it into an 18F request, and then the grand jury came in. Because of the change in management, it slowed our processes down. But finally, and then the interim director was resigned, and shortly after that is when my people called me in and said, hey, listen, sit down. And I thought, well, how bad is this? And they said, number one, they didn't need the $30 million. The money was always there. The restricted money was money that was non-restricted, put into a restricted account, basically they think to hide it. That the money that they owed within themselves was not necessary to be paid back, because you don't have to pay yourself back. And ultimately, so you don't need the $30 million. And the other thing is, the layoffs of the 200 people was not necessary and did not save nearly the money that they had thought it was going to save. And people within different health departments, the gentleman at Norman had told them that it wasn't going to save the money. They just ignored that. And so subsequently, then there's other people that have been put in, they're sorting this thing out. And I would tell you, there's a lot of good work being done by the health departments around the state. And what happened was you had a few people that made decisions that ultimately put a negative light on the health department as a whole, and now people are trying to work through and correct that situation.
About how far into the investigation before you figured out the money wasn't missing?
Days after the layoffs happened. Which basically says, if all this turmoil had not happened, our people would have come to that conclusion a lot quicker. We could have stopped the layoffs. Now granted, the money that came from the legislature, we could have told them, hey, listen, you didn't have to have appropriated that. We did not go into that decision. That was a decision that the finance people and the people of the health department ultimately went to the legislature with. That's not something, we're not part of the management decisions. We can't step in and start running the agency. We're the auditors, we're the reporting agency. And keep in mind, this incident did not happen until after the end of a year. We normally don't audit until after the end of the year. When we got called in on a special, our people went in and reconciled 52 different accounts clear back to 2010, looked at the patterns and trends, and based on what they saw, we saw where they started overspending, but we thought, hold it, if they really had a financial problem and couldn't make payroll, that should have happened in 2016, but in 2017 they actually brought in more money than they spent, so something's not right with this picture. And so we just kept plowing through, and we realized that they had monies in accounts they hadn't transferred. They had monies in accounts they could use they didn't think they could use. They had money they thought they owed they didn't know. So all these things, once they come together, that's why when we had 3 or 4 CPAs, we had top people. Our people truly went in and analyzed this thing from top to bottom. You do an audit, that's not what you do. You look to see whether or not the information that's on their financial reports, on a financial statement audit, are correct. The information on the financial report was correct. The official records were correct. They were relying on this antiquated internal system that OMES had entered into a contract with them for $3-point-something million years before and never completed. They should have completed that project. If they'd completed that project, this would have been uncovered. If we had done a performance audit like we would like to be doing on these agencies, this would have been uncovered. And because it was. We didn't send in our investigative team. We sent our performance team in to go through and sort this out. And they're the ones that came up and unraveled this thing.
Late in the year, I think, December, January, you got out. You recused yourself very publicly. You said, I'm going to get it. Why did you do that?
Well, because of the fact that Preston Dorflinger asked that it turned into an 18F, the reason he wanted to an 18F, it basically puts a gag order on me. We had other audits that we were doing. So I said, I'm going to remove myself from this process. I've got capable people that can handle this. They did. And so when I stepped back in is whenever he had made allegations against me. When he did that, I thought, okay, this is going to taint the audit because of his allegations against me. So I'm going to do the professional thing and recuse myself. Once he was gone, then I said, well, my conflict is gone. So that's when I stepped back in.
Finally, so get close to being out of battery, Gary Jones has been on the state stage for a long time. Yeah. 2 runs, party chairman a couple of times, auditor and inspector. What's next for you?
I don't know. I mean, it's my plan B was to go home and increase my cattle herd, my registered Angus cattle herd. This drought has put a real kink in that. I've had several people talk to me about things. I really don't know. I know that I care about this state. I know that I want to do something. I'm not sure what that is. People said, well, you should have run for treasurer. You would have been shoo-in for treasurer. I said, well, yeah, but I felt that we were in a position that you need somebody that truly understands the financial position that Oklahoma's in. I felt I was uniquely qualified for that. But we all know that they'll say that money is the mother's milk of politics. That's always been my weakness. Begging for money, pandering for money is something I don't do. I do think I changed the narrative in this race to talk more about substantive issues. I had people said, you're the guy that really understands what's going on. But politics is politics. I learned a long time ago that you're disappointed in politics. I mean, I was devastated in 2006 when I lost, but I didn't give up, and I won't give up. I may do something locally. I may go into the private accounting business to open up we'll go in with somebody, do an auditing firm. But I got a lot of options, and people said, do you regret running for governor? I said, the only thing I regret, I wish I hadn't put so many signs out, because after the election, going out and picking up signs is a tough deal. But met a lot of good people. Some
people still haven't done it from.
I know, and I hope that I've gotten all mine. And I truly wish the best for the 3 people that are running for governor, and I know that they're running because they believe that they're the best qualified to do this. And if I can help anybody, on a volunteer basis or anything else that helps the state of Oklahoma, I'm willing to do that. And as you know, that I don't go away. I'll be doing something. It may be on a local level. It may be, it may be just community things, nonprofit. I know you worked with CASA. I was telling my wife the other day. I said that's something we ought to look at. What can we do to give back?
Well, you're term limited from being auditor inspector. Would you rule out doing consulting work with Treasury or state auditor inspector or any of these state agencies?
No, I haven't ruled anything out. And if I had my druthers, I wish that I had 12 years like the state representatives do, like the corporation commissioners, because it would have fit more in my timeline. I love the people I work with. I think we've made a tremendous amount of progress, and love the work I do. And I believe that we've done a good service for the state of Oklahoma. And so that being said, I just wish I had one more term. But I don't. It's reality, and I'll deal with that. And I've got a wife that I've in Southwest Oklahoma been married to for 41 years. My grandkids are at that age where after the election, I went to my granddaughter's softball game for the first time, and she got her first hit, and that was exciting. 7-year-old granddaughter, and so those are some of the things that I'll enjoy more of. Is that at some point in time, you got to put your family first, and I think it's time to maybe to look at doing that.
Mr. Auditor, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
You're listening to the new media, the Mitchell Talks Network. Learn more at MitchellTalks.com and follow me, Scott Mitchell, on Twitter @MitchellTalks.